You're listening to a series on the historicity of Jesus' resurrection. Most of the information in this series is drawn from Dr. Dale Allison's The Resurrection of Jesus, Apologetics, Polemics, History. You can find links to other episodes in this series, as well as his fantastic book, in the description. In 1882, the English Society for Psychical Research asked 17,000 people if they'd ever, believing themselves to be completely awake, had a vivid impression of interacting with a deceased person. 15,000 people responded. Of these, 10% replied yes. In fact, a decent number of respondents said that their vision was shared with other people. Last episode, I mentioned how we can say with pretty good certainty that Jesus' tomb was empty, and that this emptiness was not caused by grave robbers. The question I left y'all with was the following. If we can confirm that people had visions of Jesus, would that, combined with an empty tomb, prove that Jesus resurrected from the dead? Let's return to some more studies. In 1972, 293 widows were interviewed. 47% of these said they believed they'd experienced contact with their dead spouse. And one study towards the end of the 20th century concluded that 30% of respondents reported feeling at some point as though they were in touch with someone who had died. Even Dr. Allison himself confesses to having had an experience with a deceased person, which you can read about in his book. It should be fairly obvious where this is going, but what parallels can we draw between Jesus' alleged resurrection and other visions of dead people? So Jesus was seen and heard by multiple people at different times as well as at the same time. He was the victim of violence. His presence instilled fear and doubt in some witnesses. He spoke fairly briefly and offered comfort before disappearing. He gave guidance, made requests, and issued commands. He seemed quite real and solid. He appeared and disappeared in unusual ways, such as walking through doors. His presence was not perceived as unusual at the beginning of his apparition, such as during the Emmaus walk. His appearance was so convincing that it resulted in the witness's change of conviction, and he was seen less and less often as more time passed. These are all things that have been reported by people in the aforementioned studies. There's nothing unusual about them compared to other appearances of deceased ones. Now, some common rebuttals from Christians include, well, there was an empty tomb, right? A new religion was established. Jesus speaks many words. Apparitions rarely eat or drink. Apparitions are never seen by large crowds. We've already addressed the empty tomb. And yes, the empty tomb in conjunction with visions seems to suggest something most unusual, and that may offer the most compelling argument that Jesus resurrected. But for now, let's visit some of the other arguments. The fact that a new religion was established will be explored next episode, but it's worth noting that several religions have been established based on many ahistorical premises. Jesus does speak many words, though one could ascribe those to theological treatises written by the evangelists. After all, there's not much consistency between the Gospels regarding precisely what Jesus said, and we've covered that in previous episodes. Apparitions don't eat or drink, right? Well, actually, they do. Several times throughout the Old Testament, it's reported that angels physically interacted with whoever they appeared to. They even ate with their hosts, and there are plenty of stories of deceased ones touching people during visions. I refer to those studies I was mentioning before. Finally, there are plenty of examples of mass hallucinations throughout history, both religious and non-religious. Dr. Allison details a few of those in his book. This brings up the question, though. What constitutes a physical resurrection? It's important to recall how ancient Christians would have had a very different understanding of physicality when compared to a Thomistic Christian, or a Newtonian physicist, or a quantum physicist. For starters, when Jesus appeared to Mary Magdalene or Peter, I highly doubt either of them took samples of his DNA to measure his chemical composition to make sure he was indeed physical. What matters is that Jesus appeared physical to them, and we've already discussed how lots of apparitions appear physical but turn out to be hallucinations. And hallucinations, of course, aren't physical, right? Wrong, actually. Now, I'm no physicist, but my very basic understanding of quantum physics informs me that photons, waves, particles, electrons, etc. are very physical. And one thing we know for certain is that if God is going to resurrect us, it certainly won't be according to our precise atomic structure. I mean, Jesus is seen walking through walls, which is outright impossible if he had retained his same atomic structure. My point is this. If even light and color are physical structures, which quantum physics affirms, then wouldn't a hallucination be just as physical as a resuscitated body? Furthermore, if Jesus can suddenly walk through walls and doors, wouldn't that make him something different than a merely resuscitated body? Something greater, something transformed. We cannot prove that Jesus was literally resurrected, or if he was envisioned, or some combination of the two. But one thing is for certain. We need to reevaluate how we understand physicality and apply it to Christ's alleged resurrection. We are almost at the end of our journey, but before we conclude, next episode we will explore what Dr. Allison considers to be 8 rather poor arguments about the resurrection, 4 of which are pro-Christian, 4 of which are pro-skeptic. Until then, have a great day. God bless you.